you made much piñatas in the past?
Yeah, I started making them like a few years ago. First for like my nieces and nephews, and then and then I did one for the Mitchell Gallery.
Right, the mall, right?
Yeah, for the mall show.
Definitely remember that.
And it was the water park building.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's really funny.
it was fun, but then I don't know, like I definitely started challenging myself more with it and thinking of other things I could do. I also love that it's like an art form too. It's like Dollarama materials, you know?
Oh, yeah. I'm always just curious about, like, I guess, like, the reasoning and history behind the action of it all, like the beating up of this object until it, like, spills goodies.
Yeah. Like I was saying, it's definitely celebratory, you know, because it's like, yeah, it can be kind of complicated because you have, you know, items that you really love, you know, with kids it can be like, you know, Spider-Man, who they love. But then like this one, for example, it's a gondola because I've been making it from my friend Emily Riddle, like the local poet, and it was because the city was proposing a gondola in the Rosedale power plant area, which is like, you know, an indigenous, you know, graveyard there. So, you know, then it can also be like this act of defiance, you know, and like taking out your anger out on this object too. Like I know in Latin American countries, they also, you know, will make them of politicians and stuff, right? Like when, like in Mexico, specifically with Donald Trump, like, you know, there was like Donald Trump piñata, so you could smash them. So there's this like duality of like purpose, you know?
Right. I really like this idea of you making this piñata about something that, you know, maybe is a little bit more complicated and has room for some critiques, you know, just with the whole idea of the gondola being built over land and water with specific histories that in ways is very inappropriate and it's very upsetting for a lot of communities. And so this is like kind of celebrating those communities who are affected by that. Because a lot of the imagery used is like sort of moments of nostalgia, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a lot of like nostalgia and like, I mean, is in it was a big loss to leave El Salvador, so it's just like it's very present with me to talk about it, you know, like and celebrate it, because I think it was really hard to leave that world behind, you know, and like you know, I'll never stop thinking about it and, you know, dreaming about it, and like it shaped who I am, you know, so it's always gonna be a part of my practice, whether it's like, you know, talking about things that happen or just like celebrating the culture. Like ultimately I want to celebrate the culture because the country is like, you know, it's seen as a third world country with a lot of like conflict and a lot of violence, and like that part is definitely true, and that part is like what brought, you know, my family to Canada, but it's also like it's a very joyful and beautiful place. And I think like with being artists of color and immigrants, we like, you know, there's this part that like can feel a bit performative, where we have to like perform our trauma in order to get like, you know, people's attention. Yeah, like I want to talk about, you know, things that happen in my childhood, and like, you know, my family came to Canada because of a war and we were displaced.
I don't know if this is done already, but you were working on a memoir
Yeah.
called Colonia?
Yeah, it's a graphic novel about my time there before coming to Canada. I think it'll eventually be longer, but so that's one example where like I'm definitely wanting to talk about the war and those memories, and like, you know, the disclaimer is that, you know, my family wasn't involved in any conflict and stuff. We're just kind of like sort of an average kind of like middle income family. That was just kind of part of things, and we grew up in and around it, you know. So yeah, it's just like memories, especially talking about the neighborhood specifically that I grew up in. And the word Colonia it translates directly to colony, but it's also like used as a word for neighborhood.
Okay.
In I think countries in Central America at least. So it's kind of just like your neighborhood, your hood kind of reference to that, because it's really just about, again, growing up in that neighborhood during the war and just like feeling really like safe as a child and not scared, because like I really had a community of people like, you know, taking care of me and like watching over me. Yeah, just like keeping an eye on each other. You know, these were times where there was like a lot of blackouts, like no power, no electricity, no water. So it's just kind of like you know, it's a tropical place, and so many of us had like fruit trees, and so sharing like our resources that way, you know. The people who had telephones sharing like their telephones so that like you could reach like family that was far away and let them know you were okay, kind of thing. And yeah, there was like this really scary real war happening, but like I was, you know, a 6-year-old child, 8-year-old child, and like I held on to those memories for so long, and they really felt like some of the best times of my life. And I feel like I've spent a lot of time trying to like recreate that community, you know, like that was, losing that community was like a big loss that, you know, I think I'll probably deal with, you know, for the rest of my life, you know, just being away from that, and like the contrast to coming to Canada where things are not like that, right? It's a very different culture. And like it didn't make for a long time Alberta didn't make sense. I was like, what kind of random location is Alberta? But like, you know, as an adult, I'm like, you see all the ways that it made sense, you know, with like the oil and gas, you know, and Alberta needing like a workforce or whatever, like it makes sense now, you know.
Yeah, for the longest time I thought about that as well. I was like, why did my parents choose to immigrate to Alberta? Yeah, but then I realized, like, I mean, for the longest time Alberta was prosperous economically and probably seen as like a safe haven or the best option for a lot of immigrants in terms of like a quality of life. And do you know what the state of El Salvador is like now?
Yeah, sadly it's kind of descending into another round of fascism, which is tough. But it's like, I don't know, at the same time, I mean, going back, it's like I probably romanticize it, you know. I'm just like really happy to be in that warmth again. And like there's still people like, you know, fighting for their rights, but like we have those same issues here as well, you know. There's a president in place right now who's very much would like to remain in power, you know. And it's very similar to like wartime politics, where it's like the police and the military can kind of like arrest you under no grounds, basically, you know. So there's a lot of like persecution of like journalists, anyone who's like critical of the the government, you know, kind
Oh.
of thing. So it's sad to see things go back to that, but it's also complicated, you know, because it's like a president that also a lot of like the the elder folks like, because to them he sort of cleaned up the gang problem, you know, and it's just like,
But probably through very radical
yeah,
means.
exactly.
And so would you say, I know you've talked about how this piñata is perhaps something for fun, but also you're still thinking about stuff related to your art practice while it not necessarily being like a new like official work or whatever. But would you still say that, you know, the viñata is sort of like another example of those nostalgic moments or like memories and things of your past that sort of you long for, like, you know, like everything else with like the plantains and the massacre.
Yeah, I think they're all like tributes to the culture, you know, and reinterpreted with like whatever resources I have access to, you know. And I think like, yeah, I mean, it does come from like a sense of scarcity for sure, because like, and longing, because like some things aren't readily available here, right? Like there's so many more different cultures here now, so there's like more plantains, and I'm so thankful for that. But I feel like in the 90s when we first got here, it was a big adjustment to find like foods from, you know, home, you know, and it's very depressing, and such like they're so important. It's such a big connection to who you are, you know. It really
It's
feels
life,
like it's
yeah.
in your like DNA, to like the way these foods can bring comfort. So yeah, like I think, you know, being of the Salvadorian diaspora, like I have this romanticized idea of these items, or these like foods, or, you know, piñatas, because, you know, they weren't readily available to me for a long time. I'm also just like a big fan of like pop culture, and like, you know, like graffiti culture, and just like, you know, flipping images, or flipping like cultural identifiers and reproducing them in whatever way is always like something that feels fun and exciting for me. My name is Michelle Campos Castillo. I'm an artist and also co-executive director at Latitude 53 in Edmonton. My art practice includes a little bit of everything. I've done a bit of public art. I've done work with textiles and sculpture. Right now, I'm focusing on a graphic novel. So it's a lot of drawings, which I think would probably be my first love and my first introduction to art. And my art, a lot of it has to do with celebrating my Salvadorian heritage, my Salvadorian identity as an immigrant and refugee. I want to talk about how I was displaced from, you know, a loving home and community, and how I want to celebrate that culture, and also make that experience more about joy versus, um, you know, a tragedy. So I want to pick out the parts that are celebratory and still acknowledge that those hard truths.
And I guess I wanted to ask you specifically with public art recently, um, was there a specific reason that you wanted to pursue specifically art in the public space?
I think oftentimes when I do like artist talks, I often talk about how, graffiti and graffiti culture was my first introduction to public art. Writing the LRT in Edmonton as a newly immigrated child, I saw a lot of the graffiti along the train lines. And yeah, it was just an introduction to, painting on walls and that possibility. And it's always stuck with me because, you know, it felt truly accessible. Um, in terms of how I got started in public art, I think it was sort of accidental in this way. Like, I don't have a, a fine arts background, like, I don't have that education, but I wanted to leave a mark on the city, I guess, in this way. I don't know. I don't know if I like that word, but basically, I saw I was friends with people on the Arts Council, and they would always talk about. So I got to know the public art projects, and so many of the times, a lot of the calls went to, or a lot of the projects were awarded to a lot of likely European architects, just people from away, making these public art pieces around the city. So when the opportunity came to do one at Belvedere Station, I jumped at that opportunity, and I just kind of went into research mode of trying to figure out a way to make something sculptural, which again, I don't have that background, and I also feel like there's a lot of gatekeeping of that knowledge in public art as well. So, I feel like a lot of people don't know how to get into it, and a lot of people are not willing to give out that information. So I almost felt like I was motivated in part by spite, honestly, because I was like, this is the neighborhood that I grew up in. I wanted to be someone from the community to have this piece. So yeah, that's kind of how that happened, and it kind of speaks to my practice too in general, like the kind of mediums that I work with. It's just kind of like what's accessible to me at the time. And I think it's also just part of being maybe like a artist of color or immigrant artist, where it's like, there's a sense that for me personally, there's a sense that I need to build on so many skills and gather a lot of skills, because art is not a very sustainable world to live in, and just having different sets of skills, will help us survive or keep at it longer.
The Nicki Minaj vinyl.
Yeah.
Just so funny.